Alright everybody, we are back, this time for UFC Vegas 90, Allen versus Craig 2 in the UFC's middleweight division. The main event is a rematch from a few years ago between Chris, the Action Man Curtis, stepping in on short notice to take on the streaking contender, I believe winner of 5 or 6 fights in a row, in Brendan All In Allen. Can the Action Man once again prove that he has the number of All In, or will All In go all in on moving up towards a title shot at 185 pounds? So without any further ado, let's get this started and step into the ring. Hey guys, alright, so before we get into the breakdown, let's just talk a little bit about last week. I mean, honestly, you know what, forget it. I don't even want to talk about last week. It was just really weird. The reads were there on most of the fights. I did have Weidman by either KO in round 1 or 2 or submission in round 2 or 3. And he comes out and gets a KO in round 3. It ends up getting turned to a decision, but if you bet the KO 3 for Weidman, I think it was like 100 to 1, like plus 10,000. And I don't know why I didn't just play it to be safe. And then right before the LGO fight, I was about to put a little bit of money on a first round KO for Kyle Nelson, just because I thought it was just going to be a really weird fight. And of course, didn't do it. So, you know, it is what it is. But you got to look forward. You can't look back. So we're going to kick it off with UFC Vegas 90. And we're going to kick it off with the first fight between Dylan Budka taking on Cesar Almeida. All right, so let's kick it off. Budka and Almeida. I'm going to be honest. I'm very surprised that Cesar Almeida is the underdog here. I know he hasn't competed in the UFC. He's only 4-0. Budka comes back with a 7-2 record. Both of these guys are, you know, kind of equally experienced in mixed martial arts, but the thing you do have to realize is that Cesar Almeida has fought the best of the best in professional kickboxing. Before he got to MMA, he took the Alex Pereira route, and he actually holds a victory over Alex Pereira by decision. He went 1-2 in their trilogy of fights that they had, but he did score a victory over the double champion, well, the former double champion in the UFC, in Alex Poatan Pereira. And looking at this fight, I think Almeida is clearly the better striker. Budka is not a terrible striker, though. The one thing I could see this kind of playing out as is like a Khalil Roundtree Jr. versus Gokhan Saki, where maybe Almeida doesn't respect Budka on the feet, and Budka just kind of bum rushes him and catches him with a big shot and clips him and knocks him out, because he does have power. His technique isn't the best, but he does have power. The one thing I don't like is that he kind of just forces the wrestling a little bit too much. And most people looking at a guy like Almeida are going to look at that and think, well, if you're going to force that wrestling game plan, then you're going to just either hold Almeida up against the cage, or you're going to get the takedowns and just continue to try to get top position, land ground and pound, and you know, just get off your shots on the ground and eventually look to set up a submission. I think that's the game plan that Budka's going to have here, because I think if he stands and strikes with Almeida, Almeida's going to light him up. Almeida is clearly the more technical striker, mixes up his combinations very well. He's very accurate, punctuates his combinations with that calf kick. Looks very Alex Pereira-esque, actually. A little bit sharper with his defensive responsibility on the feet, but the low kicks and the way he sets up the calf kicks do remind me a lot of how Alex Pereira sets up his kicking game. And looking at this from a stylistic perspective, I don't think this is competitive on the feet. The only way I see Budka being able to clip Almeida on the feet is if Almeida just completely disregards the striking ability and the power of Budka. But Budka is known as a wrestler. He's going to be looking to push Almeida back against the cage. He's going to be looking to shoot in when he throws those low kicks, going to be looking to tie up in the body lock and looking to go for takedowns. But if you watch the fight on the Contender Series, he didn't really have too much success in actually getting the takedowns. A lot of the fight was just him holding his opponent in Chad Hanekom up against the cage and going for takedowns over and over, but not really being successful, but just controlling the positions. He's a very strong, you know, bulky, short, bulky wrestler, and I do think he will have success in getting takedowns against Almeida, but I also think Almeida is going to come into this fight expecting the takedown, so it would be better for Budka to actually use those feints to come up top with some big strikes, you know, uppercuts, overhands, maybe feint and throw a knee up the middle. But the one thing I like about Almeida is he fought a guy who really forced that wrestling, really forced that grappling on the Contender Series, and he stuffed takedowns. He had a good sprawl. When he got taken down, which he did get taken down, he didn't really, you know, surrender position for too long in the fights, and he was able to work his way back up to the feet and get back on the striking game. Now, he is an older guy, I think he's 37 or 38. In his mixed martial arts career, only 4 fights. So the age is a little bit worrying because you don't know how much those kickboxing fights took out of him. Being a high-level kickboxer for so long and, striking at the highest level, it does take something out of you. But I do think that he is competent enough to stuff most of the takedowns on the side of Budka, and he might get held against the cage for maybe like a full round, and maybe it goes to like a split decision, but the striking is heavily on the side of Cesar Almeida. He's gonna throw the volume, he's gonna throw those low kicks, he's got very accurate shots, he's got decent power on the feet. As long as he doesn't completely disregard Budka's striking, he will be able to light him up on the feet. I don't think it's competitive. Now, it's not competitive in the wrestling either, but I think Almeida has the defensive wrestling and the ability to stop takedowns, the ability to get up on a hip, use the overhook, work his way back up to the feet, and then get back to the center of the cage and just out-volume a guy like Budka. The volume is going to be on the side of Almeida. The striking is on the side of Almeida. He has competent enough takedown defense and ability to work his way back up to the feet. Now, against Budka, who is a standout wrestler, he might get held down, and that's going to be a big problem. But if Budka can't hold down or get to the top mount and finish either via TKO or submit Cesar Almeida, then I think this is an Almeida spot all day. I'm going to go with the underdog in Cesar Almeida on the Contender Series, even though you can't 100% go with the Contender Series fights. He was able to work his way back up. He stuffed the takedowns. When he got taken down, he didn't panic. He worked his way back up, got up to a hip, used the underhook. He had decent sprawls, and I think he's going to be competitive. He had decent cardio as well in a pretty heavily paced fight on the Contender Series. Budka can embrace the grind, and if he does get those takedowns, or if Almeida just completely disrespects him, he could get caught on the feet. But I do like Cesar Almeida here. I think Almeida lands the more impactful shots on the feet. I think he out-volumes Budka. I think he stuffs most of the takedowns, and I just think the bigger moments, the damage, and the volume all go to the striker in Almeida, who has competent grappling defense and takedown defense. So I'm going to go with Cesar Almeida. I'm going to go with Almeida by a decision. So give me the underdog at plus 130 and Cesar Almeida to get the job done against Dylan Budka via a 29-28 unanimous decision. Up next, it's a battle in the bantamweight division between Dan the Determined Argueta taking on a Contender Series veteran in Gene Matsumoto. I think this fight is pretty clear-cut. There's no competition in the striking. Matsumoto will light up Dan Argueta if the fight stays standing. But Matsumoto can get taken down. When in his fight against Casey Tanner, it was a back-and-forth fight, but he showcased good cardio. The one thing I do like on the side of Matsumoto is he is a jiu-jitsu black belt. So even if he gets taken down, he knows how to work for sweeps. He knows how to work his way back up to the feet. But the striking, it's not even close. I mean, Matsumoto throws very good combinations, punctuates his combinations with low kicks, hook, rear low kick, 2-3, rear low kick, 2-3-2, rear low kick, 2 lead body kick. I mean, he really likes to punctuate his combinations with kicks. Now, against a high-level wrestler in Dan Argueta, we know that his striking isn't that great. I do not think he's going to be able to compete with Matsumoto on the feet at all. Not only is his offensive striking not that great, but his defensive striking isn't that great. He kind of defends strikes using his wrestling. You saw in the fight against Miles Johns, he started off very well, got him up against the cage, took his back, almost got a rear naked choke, controlled most of the positions, and that's really the only way I see him winning this fight. Now, in the fight against Casey Tanner, Matsumoto did give up takedowns. And that is one thing that I'm worried about. Argueta can push that wrestling pace. Argueta can get those takedowns, and we've seen Matsumoto get taken down. He doesn't surrender too much time on his back, though, and I kind of feel like that's the only way Argueta is going to win this fight, is he has to accrue top control time. He has to constantly push that wrestling, push Matsumoto up against the cage, get the singles, get the doubles, look to get to the mount, look to pass guard, look to go for submissions. Maybe, that's the path to victory. It's a submission or a decision for Dan Argueta. Like I said, he doesn't have good striking defense, and Matsumoto will light him up. This guy is good enough to light him up. Now, Contender Series. It's a big thing to fade guys on the Contender Series, and I really think you do have to pick your poison when picking fighters on the Contender Series. I think some guys look very good on the Contender Series, come into their next fight, they get killed in the UFC. Biggest example I would say recently would be Tom Nolan against Nicholas Mota. But Mota is not a can. He's not. But he's not the best. But Tom Nolan got into a firefight with a guy who kind of excels in a firefight, so I almost feel like that was his fault. He should have played that game a little bit safer. He should have stayed on the outside. He should have set it up with feints, and he should have just skated around the outside and tried to pick apart a guy like Mota. You don't want to stand in the pocket with a guy like that because you will get clipped. In this fight, like I said, I've seen Matsumoto get taken down. I've seen him get taken down multiple times. He can get taken down off of the kicking game, throwing kicks, but he can work his way back up to the feet, and the striking is not competitive. I think this is much less competitive on the feet than Budka and Almeida. You know, it's kind of awesome that we're talking about these back-to-back because it makes sense. But Argueta just doesn't have the offensive striking. He doesn't have the defensive striking. He does get hit a lot. And like I said, his main level of defense on the feet is to shoot takedowns, go to body locks, and just crowd the opponent so much that they don't have the space to get off the strikes. They're not at punching range. They're not really at kicking range. And they have to either strike off the break in the clinch, or they have to just fend off so many takedowns that by the time they're done stuffing the takedowns, they're tired and they get worn out. I do think that Dan Argueta can kind of win that battle of attrition. His nickname is the Determined for a reason. I think he can win the battle of attrition against Matsumoto if he keeps pushing that wrestling. But the question is, can he get through the fire of the technical striking and the kickboxing of Matsumoto? And I don't think he can. I've backed Argueta against Ronnie Lawrence. He should have won that fight. The ref stopped it. It got turned to a no contest. And the fight against Miles Johns got turned to a no contest because he tested positive for a banned substance. But at the same time, he still looked good in the first round and then kind of died later in the fight. The one thing you do know about Argueta, though, is that he's going to keep pushing. He's not going to quit. And if you're a betting man, he will fight for your money. But I just cannot pick him here. I can't pick him here. I'm going to go with Matsumoto. I think his striking is so much cleaner. He has the defensive jiu-jitsu to potentially threaten Argueta on the floor, but the wrestling is heavily on the side of Argueta, but the striking is just not even close. Like, Matsumoto doesn't have good defensive wrestling, but he has a black belt in jiu-jitsu, which can kind of combat that wrestling a little bit. But on the feet, it's just no competition. The power, the speed, the accuracy, the technical ability, the combinations, mixing it up between levels, it's all on Matsumoto, and I really think he's probably going to knock out Dan Argueta here. The longer the fight goes, it plays into Argueta because he's probably going to be able to slow down Matsumoto, push him against the cage, try to jump and take his back, get those takedowns, and just drain him. So the later the fight goes, it does favor the underdog in Argueta. But I like Matsumoto. I just watched that fight against Casey Tanner, and that was a fight where Tanner pushed the pace. It was a very high-paced fight, and I think that high pace, it's different because it was more a striking battle than a wrestling battle, but the high pace of that fight, I think, kind of gets him ready for the high pace of Argueta, who's going to continue to be in his face, and I think he's going to be able to land those low kicks, punctuate the combinations with low kicks, throw shots back at Argueta, and I think the technical striking is just going to be too much, and Argueta's not going to see the shots. So I'm going to go with Gene Matsumoto via a second-round TKO. I think he's going to clip Argueta. I think he's going to just hit too hard. But I could see Argueta, weathering the storm and winning later on in the fight if he does survive the early storm from Matsumoto, get those takedowns, push him back, and kind of rinse and repeat until he breaks a guy like Matsumoto. But I don't think that happens. I'm going Gene Matsumoto via second round TKO against Dan Argueta. He just doesn't have the striking to compete with Matsumoto on the feet. Up next, it's the battle in the women's bantamweight division between Norma Dumont taking on the former UFC 145-pound champion, the first ever women's UFC featherweight champion in the Iron Lady, Germaine de Randamie. 10-2 for Norma Dumont, 10-4 for de Randamie. I really think that de Randamie is the much higher level fighter on the feet. She even was able to get a submission in her last fight against Juliana Pena, who did go on to defeat Amanda Nunes. But the problem is her last fight was in October of 2020. She hasn't fought in almost 4 years. I think she had some health issues that she had to deal with and potentially a pregnancy. I'm not 100% sure, so don't quote me on that. But she had some personal stuff that she had to take care of. I believe it was health issues. But I think de Randamie is the much better fighter on the feet. She's going to be able to out-kickbox, out-strike Norma Dumont, and it's not even close. But based on the layoff, I just think she's going to come into this fight rusty. Now, she is the underdog, and it makes sense, but I didn't think the book was going to make her the underdog against Dumont. Dumont has decent striking, moves forward, puts combinations together, but she's not going to be able to compete with de Randamie on the feet. De Randamie punctuates her combinations with low kicks. She has great straight punches, good body shots, and we saw in the Juliana Pena fight, she can lock up submissions, even against people who are known for their grappling. But we saw with Juliana Pena and Amanda Nunes, she outstruck her, rocked her, took her down, and then choked her out. Women's MMA is a very volatile selection in the sport where the best fighter doesn't always win. It's just kind of who's better on that day. And that goes for all of mixed martial arts. But I'm not going to side with the fighter who's been gone for almost 4 years, who, I think, like I said, had a pregnancy and had some other issues between that. And that's why she's been gone for so long. I think in women's MMA, you can get away with ring rust more than you can in the men's divisions. But at the same time, I think Dumont, she's looked good in most of her recent fights. There was that fight against Chelsea Chandler where she landed a big shot and Chandler literally ran across the octagon to stop from getting finished. But Dumont has decent striking. She puts her combinations together well. She's a pretty technical striker in her own right, and I think she's going to have the higher level grappling. The activity is a big key for Dumont in this fight, and I think she's going to be able to get those takedowns and push the pace. But you don't want to get into a back and forth kickboxing match against one of the best strikers in the women's division in Germaine de Randamie. Even though she's been gone for a really long time, she's still one of the best strikers in the division. But I think we're going to see Dumont mix it up and show a full mixed martial arts game. I think we're going to see de Randamie be a little bit gun shy. She's not going to be as quick to the trigger as she was before, and I think that's going to get her behind on the volume. I think that's going to make her overcommit on certain things, which is going to give up the takedowns, the cage pushing, the top control, looking for submissions. And I think over 15 minutes, the fighter who's going to do more and the fighter who's going to be more active with the wrestling pressure and the takedowns is going to be Dumont. So I'm going to take the favorite, which I didn't think she was going to be the favorite, but I'm going to go with Norma Dumont to win this fight via decision. I think she has decent striking, she has decent power, but it's really going to be the ring rust of de Randamie. If de Randamie was active and she was in the game as long as Dumont has been, in terms of recency bias, I would take de Randamie because I know she can outstrike Dumont on the feet. But with the layoff, with the personal stuff, I just can't pick de Randamie here. I'm a little bit tempted because she is an underdog, but you can't let the odds get to you when you're breaking down a fight. And that long of a layoff, with all those things that went on, almost 5 years away, 4 years away, you got to take Dumont here, who has shown pretty good performances inside the cage, and she's not a complete novice on the feet. She can compete and throw combinations as well, aside from mixing up the wrestling and the takedowns. So give me Norma Dumont to out-volume and out-wrestle Germaine de Randamie over 15 minutes and have de Randamie be a bit gun-shy. Give me Norma Dumont, 29-28 unanimous decision against Germaine, the Iron Lady de Randamie. Up next, we've got a battle in the 170-pound welterweight division between the former Ultimate Fighter winner and MMA veteran in Court McGee taking on Alex the Great White Morono. Listen, I'm going to keep this short and sweet. Court McGee doesn't have a chin anymore. He used to be able to get rocked and dropped and then come back and make fights competitive with his forward pressure, his, okay striking, but mainly the high-level wrestling that he can mix up on opponents. I don't think he's going to be able to do that against Morono. I don't think Morono's great, but I think Morono is head and shoulders above Court McGee in terms of offense, technical striking, submissions, durability. I think he's way above Court McGee at this point in his career. And I think Morono's going to kind of run through Court McGee. We saw him get knocked out with a big shot by Jeremiah Wells, and that was the last time we saw McGee inside the octagon. But he's been in the game for so long. He came up with John Hackelman and Chuck Liddell. And, I just don't favor him in a lot of fights. He's been knocked out. He's been rocked. He's been dropped. And I think it's getting to a point in his career where the durability is the biggest concern, more than what he can actually go out and do offensively. Morono has decent jiu-jitsu, where even if McGee shoots the takedowns, he could grab his neck in a guillotine. He could look for submissions. He could take his back. And Morono uses a good jab. He mixes up combinations well. He goes for head kicks, goes for body kicks, mixes it up pretty well. And I think he's just going to be the more dangerous fighter, the overall more active fighter, and the fighter who isn't the greatest in terms of durability, but I think he has more durability at this point in his career than Court McGee does. I think he's going to put Court McGee out. I think he finishes him either by a KO or by a submission. You got to worry about Morono because sometimes he looks really good and sometimes he doesn't look great. I actually backed him as a decently sized underdog against Santiago Ponzinibbio on short notice, and he dropped him, hurt him, rocked him, and was on his way to winning a decision and then got clipped and got finished by Ponzinibbio with that big right hand, and that hurt me a little bit because I had a good read on that fight in terms of Morono's overall performance. I think I actually backed him by a knockout. But yeah, I think Morono is going to stick behind that jab. He has decent footwork. He moves in and out, moves laterally pretty well. Puts that 1-2 together, can mix it up with high kicks, has jiu-jitsu to stop the wrestling or at least threaten the neck of Court McGee on the wrestling and takedown attempts. And yeah, I like Alex Morono here. I like the Great White. I think it should be a lock, but I'm never going to go with a lock in terms of Morono because you don't know how he's going to look inside the cage. Sometimes he looks really good or he can look really good until he doesn't. But this should be a pretty good fight, and I think we get a finish from Morono. So give me Alex Morono to win this fight via a first-round TKO. I think he's going to clip the chin of Court McGee and kind of not let him off the hook, put those combinations together and get him out of there. So Alex Morono, first-round TKO over Court McGee. I just can't side with the veteran like McGee at this point in his career. And now we move to the first fight on the main card in the lightweight division between Trevor Peek taking on Charlie the Cannibal Campbell. Listen, I have been a Trevor Peek supporter and a Trevor Peek hater. He is one of the worst fighters in terms of technical ability on the entire UFC roster. He doesn't have technical striking. The only thing I like from him really is in terms of like technical ability is he has a decent lead head kick or body kick. He mixes up that switch kick to the head or body pretty well. But in this fight against Charlie Campbell, it is a bit worrisome if you're on the side of Campbell, and I'll explain why. Campbell is a very good technical striker. He uses his distance, manages distance, has decent jiu-jitsu, can look for submissions, can stuff takedowns, get to the top position, and he's not just a striker, he's a very well-rounded fighter. But he doesn't have the best chin. He has been knocked out. He got knocked out on the Contender Series against Chris Duncan, where he should have won that fight. I mean, he landed like 7 uppercuts in a row, a good right hand, stuffed the takedown, landed again and hurt him. And then eventually he just walked in, disrespected the striking of Chris Duncan, and got clipped with a right hand right on the chin, sat down, and then finished off when he basically had Duncan, 85% out of there, but it was basically, kill or be killed, and the winner of the shootout was the guy who was getting dominated in Chris Duncan. Campbell is much better technically than Trevor Peek. Good jab, good check hook. He defeated Alex Reyes via first-round knockout in his last fight, where he was able to land that vicious uppercut, left hook, right hand, and knock him out. That's actually the younger brother of Dominic Reyes, not former champion, but should have been former light heavyweight champion. But winning against Alex Reyes is not that impressive. He looked good against Duncan, and Duncan has had a pretty successful UFC career thus far, aside from getting submitted by Manuel Torres. But Trevor Peek, I feel like he has a shot in this fight just because he has that I don't give a fuck attitude. Like, he's going to come forward and throw hammer fists, uppercuts, 1-2s, knees, and just kind of windmill his punches. He's not very technical. He doesn't have very good technical striking. We saw in his last fight he was able to use offensive wrestling and control his opponent. But even if he takes down Campbell, I think Campbell's jiu-jitsu, his sweeps, his offensive jiu-jitsu is going to be too much for a guy like Trevor Peek at this point. I see a lot of people backing Trevor Peek due to the underdog price tag and the fact that we've seen Campbell get clipped before. But I think this is kind of, at the same time, at one point, it's one of the most dangerous matchups for for Campbell and the style of his fighting. But at the same time, it's a very favorable matchup for Charlie Campbell because the wild, looping uppercuts, hammer fists, 1-2s are going to leave Trevor Peek open for a lot of counters. And you saw against Chepe Mariscal where Trevor Peek was it wasn't like a big favorite, but a lot of people were on Trevor Peek against Chepe. And you saw Chepe just counter him with that backstep right hook, counter him with the 1-2s, and he was countering in between the looping punches of Trevor Peek. And I think Chepe is a very decent striker, but I think Campbell's a lot more dangerous and a lot sharper on the feet than Chepe. I think Chepe mixes it up a little bit better, but I think in terms of technical striking, Charlie Campbell's much more dangerous in terms of finding the openings in the wild striking style of Trevor Peek. I do not think Trevor Peek is good. I just think he has a lot of heart, and I think he has that dog in him. When you have that dog in you, it's very dangerous to bet against a guy who has that. But I think Charlie Campbell is a good stylistic matchup for Trevor Peek. Or I think Trevor Peek matches up well stylistically against Charlie Campbell, where the counter striking and the technical striking, the straight punches are going to beat the looping punches of Trevor Peek. In between the overhands, uppercuts, hooks, knees, the straight punches of Campbell, the left hook, the uppercuts, the 1-2s down the middle are going to find the chin of a guy like Peek. Now, you have to hope that Campbell doesn't just try to go out and kill Trevor Peek in the first round. Charlie Campbell needs to stay patient, he needs to stay technical, and he needs to pick apart Trevor Peek. I don't necessarily think he's going to get the knockout. I think a lot of people are on the KO for Charlie Campbell. I think it is live because in between those wide looping, the wide striking of Trevor Peek, the counters of Campbell are going to be there. If he walks forward with a big uppercut, he might slip and counter with a left hook. He might slip, counter with a cross hook, pull, counter with a 2-3, land that 1-2 down the middle. But I actually think we're going to see a lot of the grappling of Charlie Campbell in this fight, where he's going to outstrike him. He's going to land the cleaner shots. He's going to pick apart Trevor Peek. But if it gets too wild, I think Campbell's going to use his wrestling. He's going to shoot takedowns. He's going to get to the top position. He's going to take the back of Trevor Peek. I mean, if you look at the Chepe fight, Chepe got the mount like 3 or 4 times against Peek. Now, Peek did work his way back up to the feet. But I think Campbell can take the back of Peek, look for submissions. Peek's not going to quit on himself. He's a very tough guy. Like, he's not the best. What he lacks in technicality, he makes up for in having that dog and having that heart. But I can't, in a good conscience, take Trevor Peek against the fighter who I believe to be a lot sharper technically, have a lot more well-rounded game, and who makes a lot less mistakes inside the cage, and that's Charlie Campbell. I think Campbell's the better technical striker. I think Campbell's going to have the better offensive wrestling. He's going to have the better offensive jiu-jitsu. And even if it gets into a grappling exchange, I think Peek's going to be wild in that regard, and he's going to give up his neck. He's going to give up his back. He's going to give up that top position. And we have seen Campbell get chinned before. So I think Peek does have that puncher's chance. And that's big when you're Trevor Peek, because he just walks forward and has that, like I said, I don't give a F attitude, and just kind of walks forward and, gets basically raised under fire. Trevor Peek is raised under fire, where it's not technical, it's not clean, it's not pretty, but if he catches you on the chin, he can hurt you and knock you out. But I think the technical striking, the ability that Campbell has now to kind of settle into himself and not get into those firefights, I think plays into his hand against a fighter like Trevor Peek, who's wild. And like I said, he's just not that good. I'm sorry, he's not that good. He's not UFC level. I think they have him in the UFC because of his wild style, but he's not UFC level. He's always live to chin his opponent and knock him out, and maybe he clips Charlie Campbell. We've seen his chin get cracked before, but I think Campbell is easily the side here. I'm not technically sure if it's a KO or submission, because like I said, I think Campbell's going to be the sharper striker. He's going to land the counters. He's going to be able to counter the wide looping shots of Peek, but I also think he might change up the game and go for takedowns on the forward pressure of Trevor Peek, and maybe he gets a submission. I'm going to go with a submission, actually, for Charlie Campbell. I'm going to go with the fact that he outstrikes him on the feet, gets Peek to be a little bit too wild, shoots a double, spins around, takes his back, and gets a rear naked choke. I'm going to go with Charlie the Cannibal Campbell to get the job done via a second round rear naked choke submission against Trevor Peek. Anything under minus 200, I think is a good play on Charlie Campbell. But anything over that, I would be worried. And maybe you just take fight doesn't go the distance. But it could go to a decision if Campbell just kind of stays on the outside and picks apart Peek with sharper, cleaner strikes and then uses takedowns to seal the rounds. But I'm going to go Charlie the Cannibal Campbell to get the job done via second round rear naked choke submission against Trevor Peek. Up next, you got a battle in the heavyweight division between Lucas Brzeski taking on Walter Walker, the brother of Johnny Walker, who trains out of Russia, not out of Ireland. I feel like Brzeski, I know he won that fight, was supposed to win that fight against Martin Budai. Budai's been decent in the UFC, but he got killed by Shamil Gaziev. I think this is a showcase fight for Walker. Walker has better grappling and offensive jiu-jitsu than his brother and Johnny Walker. He's not that great on the feet, so there is a potential that maybe he gets outstruck and outpointed by Brzezinski, but his power, his ability to throw like flying knees, uppercuts, head kicks, just mix up his striking on the feet and then have the grappling and wrestling to fall back on. I think Walker wins this fight pretty easily. I think they gave Walker this fight for a reason. I think this is a showcase bout for the UFC debutant. Now, we've seen people get, their party spoiled and people play spoiler for UFC debutants, but I don't think that's going to be the case here with Brzezinski. I mean, Brzezinski's 1-3-1 in his last 5 fights. Kind of can't buy a win. Got knocked out by Waldo Cortez Acosta, and I think Costa is definitely better technically than Walker, but I think Walker has an overall more well-rounded game than than Waldo Cortez Acosta. Like I said, pretty agile for a heavyweight. He's definitely a lot thicker than Johnny Walker. The guy's carrying around some extra weight, but he can still move knees, uppercuts, elbows, head kicks. And I think he gets a finish here against Brzezinski, who's been clipped, who's been knocked out, who's been put away early in fights before. Maybe Brzezinski spoils the party, but I just don't see it. I'm going with Walker. Walter Walker via a first-round TKO. I think he gets Brzezinski out of there. I don't think Brzezinski's technically UFC level. And, I think he gets walked through here by Walker, no pun intended. So give me Walter Walker, the Russian Walker brother, to be able to defeat Lucas Brzezinski via first-round TKO. Maybe he makes it to the second. Who knows? But I think he gets a finish. I think he just outpaces Brzezinski on the feet, clips him on the chin, and puts him out. So give me Walter Walker, first-round TKO over Lucas Brzezinski. Up next, you got a battle in the lightweight division between Ignacio Bahamondes taking on Christos Giagos. I think this is very similar to the Daniel Zellhuber fight and Christos Giagos and Daniel Zellhuber fight, except I think Ignacio's a little bit more well-rounded, and I think he's better on the feet in terms of offensive ability. He likes to switch his stances between orthodox and southpaw. He throws a lot of body kicks, head kicks, knocked out Roosevelt Roberts in like the last 10 seconds of the fight with a spinning wheel kick. Vicious KO. But there's been some fights where he's kind of gotten humbled a little bit, and I think the UFC marketing machine and just fans in general were very high on Bahamondes, and then the loss to Ludovic Klein and the loss to John Makdessi, I think, really soured a lot of people on this kid. But Bahamondes can grapple. He has submissions in his back pocket, but mainly he wants to keep it on the feet. He doesn't have the best takedown defense, and I feel like Giagos is going to be the better grappler here. He's going to be able to push that wrestling pace, going to be able to look for those takedowns. Even landed a big right hand against Daniel Zellhuber early in the fight and almost knocked him out, and then ended up getting submitted. I could see Giagos landing a big shot on Bahamondes and clipping him, but I think Bahamondes is just too technical on the feet. He's too sharp. He mixes things up too well. And the one thing I do like about Bahamondes is he has a unanimous decision victory over Trey Ogden. We've seen how good Ogden's looked in his recent fights. I know he technically didn't win that fight against Nicholas Mota, but he should have as an underdog, and then came through and dominated Kurt Holloway to a decision victory. I think that win for Bahamondes, which was a pretty clear decision, is a good look for him, heading into this fight when Ogden's on the up and up. Giagos has decent power in his hands, but he's nowhere near the striker of an Ignacio Bahamondes. Maybe he can clip him with a big left hook or a right hand and hurt him. It's definitely possible, but I think Giagos is going to be looking to push that wrestling pace, push Bahamondes up against the cage, look for takedowns, and I actually think Bahamondes wins this fight via a submission. I think a lot of people are expecting either a KO or decision, but like I said, I see a lot of similarities between this fight and the Daniel Zellhuber and Christos Giagos fight where, Giagos is so heavily outmatched on the feet, he might land some big power shots, he might clip Bahamondes and hurt him and kind of, sit him in a chair, and maybe he rocks him enough to get him out of there, but I haven't seen a lot of durability issues from Bahamondes, and I think he can get through the fire. Bahamondes has looked a lot better, I think, in his UFC career than Daniel Zellhuber, in my opinion. Zellhuber lost to Trey Ogden via decision in his UFC debut. Bahamondes beat Trey Ogden. Even though they're not fighting each other, I think it plays into similarities here. Bahamondes fighting Yagos. Yagos getting submitted by Zellhuber, but, almost knocking out Zellhuber. So you do have to respect the power of Yagos on the feet, but I think the body kicks, the knees, the stance changes, the low kicks, I think he will be able to stuff the takedowns of Yagos, and I think he's going to hurt him to the body in this fight a lot. The legs and the body, switch kicks to the body, front kicks to the body. I think it's going to force a shot out of Yagos, and I think Bahamondes is going to lock up his neck in a Darce choke. Either a Darce choke or an Anaconda. I'll go Anaconda. I feel like I like to pick the Darce choke a lot, but I think he hurts him to the body, hurts him up top, chops the legs, forces a panic shot out of Yagos, and then he locks up that Anaconda choke and gets a sub. I'm going to go with Ignacio La Jaula Bahamondes via a second round Anaconda choke submission. I think he subs Yagos because of the heavy wrestling game plan, and I don't think he's going to want to stand on the feet and strike with Bahamondes for too long because he's going to get outclassed. So yeah, I like Bahamondes to catch the neck of Yagos on a bad shot and get a sub after hurting him on the feet and kind of just picking him apart. So give me Ignacio La Jaula Bahamondes via second round Anaconda choke submission. I think this is a pretty good fight for Bahamondes here. Up next, we've got a battle in the featherweight division between Morgan, the last pirate, Charrier, taking on Chepe the Machine Mariscal. I think it's Chepe Machine Gun. I might be wrong. But Chepe versus Charrier. I think this fight is one of the closest fights on the card. I'm going to be honest. I originally wanted to play one side. I watched the tape. I wanted to play the other side. And now I'm kind of thinking that maybe it's best to just stay away from this fight. Because Charrier is very good. He's not the best. But I think in this fight against Chepe, he's going to have some success with attacking the body. Charrier, in his UFC debut against Manolo Zucchini, I played Charrier by TKO, I think, which was like plus 120. He was like minus 500 or 600 on the money line, so he was expected to win. But he found those body kicks easily, and not only landed one that hurt the opponent, but he found the opening to land the second. It was very pinpoint accurate. And the only reason I think that's going to work against Chepe is because if you go back and you watch the fight against Jack Jenkins, Chepe Mariscal was getting hit with a lot of those southpaw body kicks. And I think that Charrier, when they're both in that orthodox stance, he'll probably attack low kicks. But if he sees that Chepe stays in orthodox, I think he's going to shift to southpaw and attack with that power left kick to the body. I think body kicks and low kicks against a fighter like Chepe open up the strikes up top to the head. You're not just going to headhunt a guy like Chepe and beat him. He's very durable. He lands good counters. And I really think that Trevor Peek fight for Chepe was a very good test of how he's going to fare inside the UFC. And I know I'm kind of contradicting myself because I said Trevor Peek's one of the worst fighters on the UFC roster. I still stand by that. And I said that earlier. They're on the same card. But that chaos, that forward pressure, that, winding up big shots and every shot's looking to KO you, that's good when you start your UFC career out because you can tell how you're going to fare under pressure, under forward pressure, under big power, under knockout shots. Chepe switched from orthodox to southpaw, landed a good check right hook, landed some 1-2s, landed a front kick to the face, landed some good shots to the body. He got clipped by some shots of Peek, but he stayed within himself, got those throw takedowns, controlled from the top, was able to pass into the mount multiple times in the fight, took the back, almost got a rear naked choke. Peek survived, but he showed a very well-rounded game. And then in the fight against Jack Jenkins, I saw those body kicks that were landing from Jenkins. But aside from that, Chepe, really when he goes for his takedowns, it's either a head and arm throw or it's that whizzer hip toss. And I think that would be a decent, have a decent chance against Morgan. But Morgan has good jiu-jitsu. Morgan looks to take the back, looks to go for submissions, but he's very good from the top position and especially inside the guard. The only thing is I don't think Chepe really is a fighter who's going to play off of his back too much. I think a lot of his success comes from being in that top position after securing takedowns and then accruing top control time, then looking to pass the side control, looking to pass from mount or pass to mount and go from there. I think Charrier is better off of his back in terms of throwing up submissions, in terms of offering up things off of his back than Chepe is. But I think that this fight is pretty much a coin toss. The UFC experience you obviously have to give to Chepe, and that's why I go back to that Trevor Peek fight. Even though Peek isn't the best technically, he's not a very technical fighter, that forward pressure, that aggression, those power shots, that plays into your ability to see how you're going to hang at the highest level. Now, it's going to be harder against fighters who pick their shots better because you might walk into some good counters, and I do think those body kicks from southpaw or orthodox, depending on what stance Chepe switches to. Like, if they're both orthodox and Chepe steps into southpaw and lands that right hook, I expect Charrier to kind of brace for that left hook and then back up and throw the retreating right body kick. And then if they're both in orthodox, I think we're going to see Charrier kind of throw that left hand as a jab, but switch southpaw and then follow up with the left body kick behind it. I think both of these guys are, going to be difficult to beat. I do favor the UFC experience of Chepe Mariscal. I think the late round cardio favors Chepe, because if you go back and you look at the fight with Morgan Charrier taking on, I can't think of the guy's name. I just watched the fight the other day. Hold on. It's Paul something. Hold on. Morgan Charrier. Paul Hughes, maybe? I think it was Paul Hughes. Yeah, against Paul Hughes. He lost a majority decision. That was back in October of 2021. And he's racked up 4 wins since then, but had 3 canceled bouts in between. Well, 4 canceled bouts in between. He won a split decision against Daniel Bazant. He won via doctor stoppage against Pedro Souza. Won via knockout in the 3rd round against Diego Silva. And then won against Manolo Zucchini with that body kick in the 1st round. I think the more dangerous fighter, in terms of one-hitter quitter ability, in terms of knockout power, in terms of ground and pound from the top, that does go to the last pirate in Morgan Charrier. But I think the UFC experience, I think the technical ability, I think the patience of Chepe in firefights, where yes, he will get into firefights as well, but I think it would be better for him to kind of play on the back foot and counter against Morgan Charrier. And when he gets into those firefights, just pick your shots, find the openings, look for takedowns, and go from there. I think Morgan Charrier can definitely win this fight. I think he can hurt Chepe Mariscal to the body. I think he can hurt him to the head. I think he can, land ground and pound if Chepe winds up on his back. But I think the offensive wrestling, I think the counter striking, I think the forward pressure, the UFC experience, I think that all plays to the side of the underdog in Chepe Machine Gun. I think Chepe Mariscal wins this fight based off landing the bigger counters and using offensive wrestling in the 2nd and 3rd rounds to kind of tire out Morgan Charrier. I think he eventually gets those takedowns. I think he winds up in the top position. I think he can push a higher pace over 3 rounds than Morgan Charrier. I know Charrier has some finishes in round 3. I do think the body kick is going to be a big problem. I do think the power of Morgan Charrier can hurt Chepe, but I think Chepe survives, and I think he just lands the cleaner shots, finds good counters, uses his wrestling later in the fight, cage pushes, gets takedowns, and slows down Charrier and really picks up the pace in round 3. And I think we either get a 3rd round finish from Chepe, or we get Chepe by decision. But I think this fight could be close, where Charrier hurts Chepe early, lands the bigger shots early, and then Chepe comes on late, but maybe he loses the first 2 rounds, has a big round 3. So I wouldn't recommend betting it, but I do like Chepe as the plus 120, plus 110 underdog. I know the money's coming in on Chepe Mariscal, but I'm going to ride again with Chepe in this fight. I don't really want to pick against Charrier because I like him, but watching more and more tape, I think the fight's close, but I lean Chepe ever so slightly. I think he's a little bit better technically. I think he has the better ground game than Charrier, and I think if he can avoid the big power of Charrier, which we have seen Chepe get finished before, then he can win. But yeah, I'm going to go Chepe Mariscal via decision. I think he finds a way to really pick it up in round 3. Do enough in round 2 to win that round, but kind of plays on the safety and defense in round 1. And I think he just picks it up over time, lands the cleaner counters, gets those takedowns, accrued some top control time, and wins on the judges' scorecard. So I'm going to go Chepe, the Machine Gun Mariscal, to defeat Morgan, the last pirate Charrier, or Charrier, however you want to say his name, via a 29-28 unanimous decision. I could see it being a split, but I think he does enough in those 2nd and 3rd rounds to win here. So give me Chepe Mariscal, 29-28, unanimous decision. But not a fight I would bet. And like I said, one of my most look forward to fights on the card. All right, and now we're at the co-main event in the featherweight division between Alexander the Great Hernandez taking on Damon the Leech Jackson. I think this fight is actually a lot closer than people give credit to Damon Jackson for. I think a lot of people hate on Damon Jackson and pick against him, and there are certain fights where it's definitely, I guess it's definitely warranted. Like against Ige, you knew he was going to get KO'd. against Topuria, but he's losing to really good guys. I mean, Dan Ige, like I said, Ilia Topuria, the current featherweight champion, was a really close fight with Dan Argueta against Jackson, but Damon Jackson just comes forward and he finds ways to win. Against Billy Quarantillo, that fight was very close. He got top control time. He took his back, put the body triangle in. And, Damon Jackson is going to be a lot slower, a lot more rigid, a lot stiffer on the feet than Alexander Hernandez. But I think the longer the fight goes, it plays into the game of the leech. Like in round 2 and round 3, I think Jackson can pick up that pace, but you have to worry about the explosions of Hernandez. I think Hernandez should come out in this fight and look for a finish early, because you can push Damon Jackson back, you can hurt him, and if you really bum rush him and go forward, you can hurt him and get him out of there. So I think the longer the fight plays out, in round 2 and round 3, it does favor the underdog in Damon Jackson, because I think he has better cardio, over 15 minutes, than Alexander Hernandez. But in the fight against Jim Miller, Hernandez showed a good game plan, outworked, outpaced, and beat Jim Miller, and didn't look like he was slowing down too much at all. Against Billy Quarantillo, he dominated him in round 1, slowed down, and then got TKO'd by Quarantillo, I believe in round 2 or maybe the beginning of round 3, and just kind of blew his wad, metaphorically. Damon Jackson is not going to be able to hang with Hernandez on the feet. He's going to be out. He's going to be countered. He's going to be hit. I think it would be better for Hernandez to just put the foot on the gas the minute the fight goes and just keep moving forward, landing big shots, uppercuts, hooks, 1-2s down the middle, switch stance head kicks, and just go forward early and try to get him out of there. Now, you don't want to slow down, because if Damon Jackson can stay in it, he's probably going to be able to take you down, get on your back, ground and pound, look for a submission. But I think this fight is very close, and I was going to lean to Damon Jackson as the underdog, but I just feel like he gets hit too much. I think he leaves those openings, and Billy Quarantillo is a decent striker, but he doesn't have the speed or the power of Alexander Hernandez, and I think Hernandez can put one on the chin of Damon Jackson, hurt him, and get him out of there. When he hurts you, he does put 4, 5, 6, 7 punch combinations together. He will switch stances. He'll go back and forth between orthodox and southpaw mid combination and put things together. And I think this is a good fight for Alexander Hernandez early. I think later on, the fight does go into the favor of Damon Jackson if he can push forward, survive early, get the takedowns, get to the back, work the ground and pound, look for a submission. But I'm going to go with Alexander Hernandez here. I think he is the rightful favorite. This isn't a fight I would bet at all. I'm going to sit here and tell you the truth. I would not bet on Hernandez. I would not bet on Damon Jackson. If I was going to bet on this fight, I would probably bet the fight to not go the distance, because I think somebody does get finished. Either Hernandez death gasses and just completely gasses out midpoint of the second and into the third, or the explosion and the early onslaught of Hernandez with the combinations and the power gets Damon Jackson out of there. You forget that Alexander Hernandez knocked out Beneil Dariush in his UFC debut, and then Dariush went on that huge tear in that win streak. So Hernandez does have good striking. He moves well. He has all the tools to be one of the best in the game, but he's kind of, I don't mean this disrespectfully, but he's kind of like a mental midget. Like, he's very good, but he gets in his own head, and if he can't be the bully, he'll kind of slow down and just give up. I do think Damon Jackson is a fighter who can be bullied and who it would work in the favor of Hernandez, but the only reason I wouldn't tell you to go bet on Hernandez is because I do think he will slow down if he can't get Damon Jackson out of there early, and Jackson's going to keep moving forward, get the takedowns, look to top control, maybe look for a submission, but he also will slow down if it's a back and forth war. But he does get clipped, he does get hurt, he does get wobbled, so it's a very close fight, but I'm going to lean Hernandez about 60-40. 60% Hernandez wins and 40% Damon Jackson wins. But I'm going to go with Alexander Hernandez by a first-round knockout. I think he's going to be able to get on the gas, hurt Damon Jackson, and get him out of there. His striking isn't the best. His defense isn't the best. But later on in the fight, this is a live bet opportunity for Damon Jackson. If Hernandez dominates in round 1, but you see towards the last 60, 75 seconds of the round that Hernandez is kind of huffing and puffing and Jackson's moving forward, and you can get Jackson at like plus 400, plus 500, that's when you bet on Damon Jackson. Pre-fight, though, I think it's in the favorite in Hernandez. So I'm going to go Alexander the Great Hernandez to get the job done via a first-round TKO over Damon Jackson. I think he gets him out of there. Maybe second round, but I do think he knocks him out. But again, not a fight I would bet on because we've seen Hernandez break mentally and I do think Jackson can push the pace as long as he doesn't get hurt early in the fight. So give me Alexander Hernandez first round TKO, but again, live betting, it would be on the Leech and Damon Jackson. Now we move to the main event of the evening in a rematch between the streaking contender in Brendan All-In Allen taking on the man who's coming off a victory over Marc-Andre Barriault via decision in Chris the Action Man Curtis. I'm not going to go into stats, I'm not going to go into things because we've already seen this fight. Chris Curtis came in after winning his UFC debut via knockout against Phil Hawes and was getting picked apart early by Allen, the body kicks, got taken down, got his back taken, survived, came back, landed a counter inside the shot of Brendan Allen, hurt him, and then knocked him out. And I believe it was round 2. I think Curtis got a second round KO. Now, I do think the overall more well-rounded fighter is Brendan Allen, but you have to think, Allen's also lost to Sean Strickland, who, yes, was the middleweight champion of the world, but trains with Chris Curtis. Now, Allen also defeated and looked probably the best he's looked in his career, aside from getting hit with 1 or 2 big power shots, against Punahele Soriano. But he's 1-2 against Extreme Couture fighters. I think Brendan Allen hasn't really improved too much since their first meeting. I really don't. I don't think Curtis has improved too much either, but I will say I think a 25-minute fight favors Chris Curtis more than it favors Brendan Allen. I think Allen can get behind his jab, throw the body kick, throw the 1-2. I think the body kicks and the head kicks are going to be the best weapons for Brendan Allen against Curtis, because I know a lot of people are expecting Curtis to get taken down, get controlled, get submitted, but Curtis has very good takedown defense. I think if Allen gets takedowns, it's not really going to be getting takedowns off like traditional wrestling, singles, doubles, body locks. I think it's going to be using takedown entries to find his way to take the back, jump on the back, look for submissions. But I don't think Curtis gets submitted, and I don't really think Brendan Allen has a ton of success taking him down. So I think if Allen wins this fight, it's going to be by decision. I think if Curtis wins the fight, it's by a late TKO. The shoulder roll defense of Chris Curtis leaves him open to body kicks and head kicks. Now, he got attacked with a body kick from Joaquin Buckley. He caught it, countered with a big left hand, dropped him, and knocked him out. But before that, the in and out movement, the forward pressure, the lateral movement, the Mike Tyson-esque bob and weave, he was picking apart Chris Curtis. But he found that counter, caught it, boom, boom, landed a big shot. I think Curtis is built for 5 rounds more than he's built for 3 rounds. I think Brendan Allen is a 3-round fighter more than a 5-round fighter, because I think he will slow down in those championship rounds more than the Action Man and Chris Curtis. The head kicks and the body kicks, like I said, against the shoulder roll can work well. We've seen it with Dustin Poirier against Justin Gaethje, where he threw that cross, followed up with the same side head kick. The shoulder roll defense of Poirier wrapped right around the back of his head, knocked him out, and that was it. Body kicks against the shoulder roll will work. You just have to worry about Curtis catching it and countering it. Curtis is going to use that jab. He's going to try to use that counter right hook, the rear uppercut, and the counter right hook, uppercut, right hook, jab, straight left hand, lead uppercut, right hook. Mixing up combinations. Allen has not gotten better defensively on the feet. I think he's gotten better offensively. He's a little bit better at putting combinations together, 1-2s down the middle, 2-3 body kick, 1-2 rear body kick, 1-2 low kick, and I think mixing up the combinations and just outpointing Curtis would work better for Allen in a 3-round fight than it will in a 5-round fight, and I really don't see the offensive jiu-jitsu and wrestling being a big factor for Allen here against Curtis, because I don't think he's going to have much success taking him down in terms of a wrestling standpoint, but he could jump on his back, maybe get a trip, take his back and get a submission, but I don't necessarily think it's going to be much of a grappling match. I think Allen's going to try to take him down, but I don't think Curtis is going to give up too many takedowns. I think he's going to be able to keep this a mainly striking matchup. And I don't think he gets a KO early, but there's nothing I've seen in terms of Brendan Allen striking that makes me think he's gotten too much better. He looks good. He looks good technically. He throws good body kicks, good 1-2s, good left hooks. Dropped Bruno Silva with a big right hand, and I think people are looking at that Bruno Silva fight and thinking like, oh, Brendan Allen's striking has gotten so much better. The 1-2s are going to be there. He dropped a guy who went back and forth with Alex Pereira, but look what we just saw with Chris Weidman and Bruno Silva. Weidman was piecing up Bruno Silva on the feet. He got hit with a few shots, but he was piecing him up, and it was mainly a striking matchup. I think Brendan Allen thinks he's a better striker, but if he goes and tries to compete in a kickboxing match against Curtis, the boxing is not what's going to get it done for him. I know we've seen Curtis get knocked out by Ray Cooper in the PFL. He got knocked out bad. That was a long time ago. I think Allen wins the striking by using the kicking game, the body kicks, the head kicks, and things like that. But you got to worry about Chris Curtis catching the body kick, sweeping it across and landing a big counter, stepping in on the kicks and just countering with a big left hand and a right hook. And like I said, in a 3-round fight, I think I would lean much more heavily towards the volume, output, and overall just more activity of Brendan Allen. But in a 5-round fight, I think he will slow down in those later rounds, and I think Curtis will have the better cardio to push in the 3rd, 4th, and 5th. I think the first round kind of goes similar to the first fight, but Allen looks really good. Allen wins the first round. He looks good in the second, but Curtis starts to find his counters, and he slows down a little bit. And then I think Chris Curtis finds the same straight left hand right down the middle and the counter right hook, but I think it's just the straight left, or he uses the right hook to the straight left down the middle. Yeah, actually, that's what I'm going to go with. I think he moves around. Allen starts to tire. He doesn't have too much success with the wrestling. Right hook, straight left hand right down the middle. And I think Chris Curtis knocks out Brendan Allen in round 3 of this main event. I think Curtis gets the job done here. I'm very surprised he's like plus 150 right now, plus 170 against Allen when he knocked him out in the first fight. I don't know what you're seeing from then until now, and I know people are going to say, oh, well, he beat a light heavyweight in Paul Craig. He beat Paul Craig because Craig was offensively pulling guard and offensively going to his back against a fighter who could compete with him in the jiu-jitsu. You're not going to see Curtis shooting takedowns on Allen. You're not going to see him pulling guard against Brendan Allen, and it's going to be much harder for Allen to take down Curtis, which is why I think if he gets the takedowns, it's more him shooting and then breaking off and finding a way to take the back of Chris Curtis. But even if he takes the back, I don't think he submits Chris Curtis. He's a better jiu-jitsu player. He's a better jiu-jitsu artist, but I don't think he's a good enough wrestler to take down Curtis, and I think 5 rounds is built for a guy like the Action Man who makes reads and has trouble in 3-round fights kind of going to decision and being a toss-up, but in 5 rounds, I think he's really made and built for a 5-round fight, training with guys who not only you beat him yourself, but you're training with the middleweight champion of the world who also beat Brendan Allen by TKO. I think Curtis wins this fight. I think he wins by a 3rd-round knockout. I think he slows down Brendan Allen, loses the first round, picks it up, finds the counters, lands the right hook, and lands the straight left down the middle, and knocks out Brendan Allen. I'm going to go with the underdog in Chris Action Man Curtis to defeat Brendan All-In Allen via 3rd-round knockout in the main event and go 2-0 on All In. The Action Man reigns supreme for the main event of UFC Vegas 90. Alright, that's it for my preview, predictions, and breakdown of Allen versus Curtis 2. You can get this podcast on YouTube, which is where you're watching it right now. And I don't know if I'm going to upload to the audio platform, but I might. Don't forget to subscribe, like, comment, and smash the notification bell with a big head kick to not miss any uploads, whether it's mixed martial arts or professional wrestling, from the premier MMA and pro wrestling YouTube channel in the Touch 'Em Up podcast. I'm your host, Double M, and I'm out. Enjoy the fights this weekend, and let's make some money, baby.